Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our 34th virtual town hall on COVID-19. We've been doing these since the middle of March, twice a week, and I'm so grateful for how many of you have participated, have asked excellent questions, and have tuned in. And I hope, as always, this is an informative 90 minutes or so where we can tell you the latest about COVID-19 and many of the other things that I've been working on. I'm actually here in Washington. I was hopeful that we'd be negotiating with the Senate right now our next major COVID relief bill. I'll get to that in just a minute, but we still haven't seen the Senate bill. And so we're obviously waiting on that in the days ahead. Before I dive in, I wanted to take a couple minutes again, as we did last week, and once again talk about the life and legacy of my dear friend and colleague, Congressman John Lewis. He will lie in state at the U.S. Capitol in the Rotunda on Monday. I know there were services in his hometown of Troy, Alabama, as there will be upcoming in Atlanta. It's no exaggeration to say that John was one of the most significant heroes and civil rights leaders in American history. And the fact that I got to serve with him and get to know him was an incredible honor and something I'll never forget. I'll never forget being able to travel with him to Selma, Montgomery, and Birmingham, Chrissy and I, to cross the Edmund Pettus Bridge. And I think it's absolutely going to happen to rename that bridge after John. But I think more important than renaming that bridge, what John would want us to do is to move forward with the Voting Rights Advancement Act. And we'd like to rename that after John Lewis, the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. And just to provide some context, John was also one of the most important voting rights advocates in American history. Everything from Bloody Sunday to the eventual passage of the 1965 Voting Rights Act, and then a legacy in Congress from the 80s, 90s, 2000s, on through to 2020, where John continued the fight to advocate for the right to vote, to fight voter suppression. And in 2013, unfortunately, the Supreme Court decided the Shelby County versus Holder case that allowed states to begin to chip away at the Voting Rights Act. And many of them did that and put, frankly, laws that were designed to suppress the vote in place. And I know this was of great concern to John, as it was to us all. And the Voting Rights Advancement Act that we passed actually in 2019 as H.R. 4, I think we need to reintroduce it, rename it the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, restore the integrity of the 1965 Voting Rights Act, send it to the Senate. And if Mitch McConnell really wants to honor the late, great John Lewis, he can take that bill and allow it to be heard in the Senate, allow amendments, allow hearings, not sitting on the bill as he did the Voting Rights Advancement Act for the last 7 months. That's how we can honor the legacy of the great John Lewis. With that, let me introduce this week's guest and turn to some other topics for discussion. Specifically, COVID-19 is on everyone's mind this week, and we're grateful and honored again to welcome Dr. Andrea LaCroix to our town hall. And I checked, Dr. LaCroix, and this is the 5th town hall of the 34 that you've joined, but I'm so grateful to you for all the excellent information that you provided to our constituents, as you'll do today. Dr. LaCroix is a distinguished professor and chief of epidemiology in the Department of Family Medicine and Public Health at UC San Diego. She's also the director of the Women's Health Center of Excellence at UCSD, and she's an expert on long-term observational studies and randomized clinical trials to identify preventative interventions that improve our prospects for healthy aging. And she received her doctoral degree in epidemiology from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Welcome back, Dr. LaCroix. It's great to see you.
Nice to be here, Mike.
Well, I'd like to begin by discussing the latest with COVID-19. And very sadly, our country passed the 145,000 mark of those who've lost their lives from the virus. And we're all shaken by that statistic and prayerful for the families affected. It's just a heartbreaking tragedy for our country. We know that the United States has the most confirmed COVID-19 cases in the world, over 4.1 million, and as I mentioned, 145,000 deaths. California now has the most cases of any state in the United States, 440,000 cases, surpassing New York, and we have 8,340 deaths. And look, statewide, the news has been troubling. Most of the state now is on notice. Of our 58 counties, 36 of them are on the state monitoring list. And together, that's 94% of the state's population. And of course, the monitoring list includes both of our counties in the 49th, San Diego and Orange counties. Cases and deaths are increasing. The number of patients with a confirmed case in California has increased by 13% over the last 2 weeks, and the statewide positivity rate is now at 7.9%. And accordingly, the reopening has rolled back. The governor has returned to stricter lockdown. Masks are, of course, required across the state. San Diego County has confirmed 26,098 cases and 524 deaths. Over the past 2 weeks, the county has recorded 7,235 new cases. Unfortunately, that fails the governor's standard. And there are now 442 patients in San Diego County hospitalized with a confirmed or suspected case. Orange County has confirmed 33,358 cases and has had 556 deaths. Over the past 2 weeks, Orange County has recorded 10,708 cases, and there are 711 patients hospitalized in Orange County. So the numbers in Orange County now are significantly worse than San Diego County. As I'm sure everyone knows, particularly those with children, as my wife and I know very well, the governor announced a week ago, Friday, that schools located in counties on the monitoring list must not physically open for in-person instruction until their county has come off the monitoring list for 14 consecutive days. Schools and counties that have not been on the monitoring list for the prior 14 days may begin in-person instruction, but they have to have strong mask and physical distancing requirements and regular testing and dedicated contact tracing. The state has set aside a little more than $5 billion in additional funding to support distance learning to ensure that schools provide rigorous and grade appropriate instruction. And again, with 2 young children at home, this news is very personal and very significant, as I'm sure it was for many of your families. And I think we all want the same thing, which is for the schools to reopen safely. And the best thing we can do to make that happen is to get off the monitoring list, which means that we need to follow the guidelines of the state and of the federal government, which means wear your masks, socially distance, wash your hands, do all the other things we know that will help to reduce community spread. The sooner that we can adhere to those rules strictly, the sooner that we'll be able to get back to normal, to whatever extent normal can exist, with masks and social distancing and the rest, but at least getting those schools back to in-person instruction. I'm going to continue to do whatever I can to help our district and really the whole country get through the public health and the economic crisis that we're facing. And I continue to believe, as I've said through these entire 34 town halls, I think, that you cannot have a healthy economy unless you have healthy people. As simple as that. As I've mentioned in our past virtual town halls, I've gone through the legislation that Congress has worked on, and I'll do that in a second. But I've been here in Washington this past week, and we're eager to work with Republicans, to work with the Senate, to get another bill to the president. On May 15th, 71 days ago, the House passed the HEROES Act, and that would have provided the relief that the American people have needed for these last 71 days. The Senate, as I said, still has not presented us with a counteroffer of any kind. And Mitch McConnell's pause during this time of crisis has been unconscionable. I thought, perhaps naively, that behind the scenes they were working on a plan. They have no plan. And maybe they'll provide it to us next week. I hope they do. The sooner they do, the sooner we're going to be able to work together and get something done. More than 25 million Americans have been receiving the expanded federal unemployment benefits of $600 a week. Those are set to expire. And a moratorium on evictions from federally assisted properties is also expiring. It's particularly troubling considering that nearly a third of American households missed housing payments at the start of July. So state and local finances are also hurting. We know that. That means layoffs. It could mean cuts to essential services. So all this is happening. We see it happening, and yet we've got no proposal from the Senate. It's unbelievable, and the American people deserve better. So to briefly recap, since March 6th, $8.3 billion for the development of a vaccine. We're working aggressively to do that. I know all the companies that are working on that in the San Diego area, and I'm very proud of all of our local companies among the scores that are trying to develop this vaccine. And we know that it's an unprecedented effort being put into that. We also know it's going to take time. Then middle of March, we passed the Families First bill, $200 billion, which at the time we thought was a lot. It is a lot, but not nearly enough. But it went to things like emergency sick leave, nutrition assistance, and quite a bit more. And then at the end of March, of course, we did the CARES Act. People are familiar with that $2 trillion package, the expanded unemployment insurance that is set to run out, the direct cash payments up to $1,200, and a ton of money for testing and tracing. Turned out not enough, but at the time we thought a ton of money. In addition to that, $150 billion for state and local governments, which again we thought would be enough, or we wanted, I think, more than that. We wanted $200 billion, if I remember, but that turned out not to be enough as well. So we now know that the Paycheck Protection Program, which was in the CARES Act, had a lot of success. Was not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but the evidence suggests that between 1.5 and 3.5 million jobs were created by virtue of that program. Over 20,000 PPP recipient businesses in our district alone that had $613 million worth of PPP loans. So that's good. What's not good is the lack of accountability and oversight over those funds. We still don't know to this day where some of that money wound up. We wanted for the true mom and pop businesses to get the funds. Many of them did not. And certain businesses that really did not need the funds wound up as the recipient. So we have to make sure that in any future allocation for PPP or for anything else, that we've got the oversight and accountability that we need. So what's in the HEROES Act? Again, 71 days ago, we passed it. $3 trillion bill, $875 billion for state, local, tribal, and territorial governments. That would include $300 million to the 49th district alone. That's why all of the mayors in the 49th, there are 9 mayors, 6 Republicans, 3 Democrats. They all agreed we need these funds in the 49th. Moreover, $100 billion for low-income renters, for eviction assistance, for rental assistance. So critically important when a third of rents are delinquent at the beginning of the month. Hazard pay for frontline workers, $25 billion for the U.S. Postal Service. So critically important that we save the USPS, and much more than that. And look, I don't think that it's realistic for Mitch McConnell to agree with every proposal in the bill or every word of every page. It was an 1,800-page bill, but offer a counter proposal. Do your job. That's what we're asking. And in the absence of action from the Senate and from Mitch McConnell, we've tried as best we can to fight for individual provisions. I led a bipartisan letter with 137 of my colleagues to provide a $25 billion lifeline to the U.S. Postal Service. And the Postal Service has been in trouble since 2006, when then President George W. Bush signed into law provisions that limited revenues from the USPS on certain products and services, and also forced prepayment of pension liabilities, something unlike any other federal agency had to deal with. So then you add the pandemic, that cost them at least another $13 billion, and here we are. So we need both a lifeline for the USPS to get through the pandemic, and we need long-term stability. We need to work on both. 630,000 Americans work at USPS, including 100,000 veterans. Anybody who cares about veterans needs to care about the United States Postal Service. I mentioned again that state and local budgets are hurting. $600 expanded unemployment insurance coming to an end. All the rental assistance coming to an end. This is no time for us to take our foot off the gas. We've got to come together again. We've got to get something passed. We've got to do it for the American people, for our lives and our livelihoods. In addition to all of this, I am deeply concerned to hear the administration and some of my colleagues continue to go after the Affordable Care Act in the middle of a pandemic. Makes no sense. Families need health care more than ever right now. We know that millions have lost their employer-provided health care as they've lost their jobs. We know that 500,000 plus have tried to sign up during the enrollment period for the ACA. And for this administration to continue in the courts to try to undermine and destroy the ACA, including protection for those with pre-existing conditions, is just staggering. 47,000 of our constituents alone in the 49th district rely on the Affordable Care Act, and their care is at risk because of the reckless actions of this administration. So there's a lot going on. It's a crazy time. But with that, I'd like to turn it over to Dr. LaCroix for her opening statement on COVID-19 this week.
Thank you so much, Congressman. Why don't we start with the first slide? I couldn't let Dr. Garfield get away with being the only one to show slides. So I had to bring a couple of slides to you this week. This first slide is a graph that comes from the Institute for Health Metrics and Evaluation in Seattle. And what I want to start out with today is talking with you very briefly about how many Americans are going to die of COVID-19. We need to go back to that first one. Yeah. And we don't know how many Americans are going to die, but it's definitely well within our agency to figure to control it better than we have. So what this graph shows is that we're currently on track by November 1st to lose 220,000 Americans under current conditions if we stay the same as we are now. It's estimated that maybe 90% of these deaths were completely preventable based on what they were able to do to contain COVID-19 in other countries. 220,000 Americans dead by November 1. If everyone were to wear a mask, which is that green dotted line, if there was universal masking, this projection reduces to 185,700. So we can save that many lives, which is about 36,000 lives if everybody were just to wear masks. And if public health mandates were to ease further, which is the other line, we lose an additional 11,000 Americans. So you can see we're almost doing as bad as we could possibly do. How many Americans are we willing to lose to COVID-19? And now we can go to the next slide. We still have to get through the winter. We still have to get to when a vaccine occurs. 220,000 by November 1 is just the beginning. And so I think we're on track to lose 1 million Americans in this pandemic because basically of our stupidity in the way that we've handled it. Second point is Americans are actually dying at a higher rate from other chronic conditions in addition to COVID-19. So this interesting analysis came out actually a couple of different ways. Between March 15th and May 23rd, visits to hospital emergency rooms declined by 23% for heart attacks, 20% for strokes, and 10% for blood sugar crises due to diabetes. The CDC estimates that since February 1 to about now, between 20,000 and 49,000 more people have died from non-COVID causes than would be expected in a typical year. And what you see in front of you now comes from an analysis published in JAMA this month, showing the deaths, the pattern in excess deaths due to diabetes on the left, and the pattern due to excess deaths due to Alzheimer's on the right. And it looks an awful lot like the COVID pandemic. What do we make of curves like this for excess deaths due to two major chronic conditions? Well, it's estimated, the authors of this paper concluded that these excess deaths were either unreported non-respiratory manifestations of the COVID-19 virus, so they might have been due to COVID and the underlying conditions, or their secondary pandemic mortality caused by disruptions in our society that diminished or delayed access to health care. And so what does this mean to you all? I want to say two things about it. One is, if you don't feel well, if you have symptoms of a heart attack, stroke, or a blood sugar crisis, call your healthcare provider and seek care in a safe environment. Do not delay healthcare. People are dying. Do not ignore your health conditions. And secondly, know that the COVID death tolls are substantially higher than what we've reported, what we see reported. And all told together, this pandemic is having a really major impact on Americans. One more point for the opening statement today, and that's the third slide, is that on July 21st, just this past week, the CDC released the results of a new study where they tested antibodies in blood from over 16,000 American adults in 7 cities across the United States. You can see the places where they tested, and what they did is they just got the blood from labs, from people who had blood tests for other reasons, all done anonymously. And the positivity rates for COVID-19 antibodies in the study ranged from 1% in San Francisco at the end of March to 6.9% in New York City between March 23rd and April 1st. And you can see the positivity rates of these different places. And on the bottom is time. So we have a big range of positivity rates. What this showed the CDC, however, was that the estimated number of infections was 6 to 24 times the number of reported cases in these cities at that time over the last few months. So the 4 million COVID cases in the United States is much higher than 4 million, which our public health officers have been telling us all along, and probably about 10 times higher, although we don't know exactly how much, and we have a long way to go before this is over. So I wish I had better news about all of these things. I think the good news is that there is a group, a large, ever-growing group of healthcare professionals and professors calling for a reset on the reopen. We were in such good shape when we first reopened, and we're in such bad shape now. And I think there was this hope that the summer would bring a reprieve from the virus, and the virus taught us, nope, there's no reprieve in summer. If anything, it's been far worse. So we need to get the infection rates back down. It's all related to our behavior. And once we do, I think a lot of things become possible. Congressman, you always said everybody wants to be reopened. We just want to do it the right way. We now know the wrong way to do it, which is rushed and ignoring the very benchmarks that were set forth as guiding it. And it remains to be seen whether we have the will as a country to do it the right way. But we're trading off American life if we don't.
Well, thank you so much for that thoughtful introduction, and we'll have plenty more questions on COVID-19. But before we get to those questions, just very briefly, a few more updates for you. Some good news. On June 30th, the Select Committee for the Climate Crisis released its comprehensive climate action plan. I'm very proud that 7 of our bills from our office made it into that final report. Vox called it the most detailed and well thought out plan for addressing climate change that has ever been a part of U.S. politics. So I was very proud to be a big part of that. Zero net carbon emissions economy wide by 2050, in the power sector by 2040, zero emission electric vehicles by 2035 for new car sales, sustainable agriculture, so much more, and importantly, $8 trillion of savings for the American people and the creation of millions of jobs. It was like when Biden the other day, he said, when Trump thinks about climate change, the word that comes up is hoax. And when we think about climate change, the word that comes up is jobs. I think he was spot on that. If you're interested in reading the report, you can go to climatecrisis.house.gov, climate crisis, one word, .house.gov, and you can read either the report or the summary of the report. Next, I am really excited to report that this past week, on a vote of 310 to 107, the House passed the Great American Outdoors Act, and this comes after the Senate passed the bill 73 to 25 recently. And now, why is this important? Well, if you like any of our wonderful beaches like Carlsbad State Beach or San Clemente, San Onofre, or you like Torrey Pines, or you love our great national parks, Yosemite, Yellowstone, Grand Canyon, Rocky Mountain, all the amazing national parks, we've had a huge maintenance backlog that has only gotten worse and worse, and this bill would fix that, and it would also fully fund the Land and Water Conservation Fund, which goes to some of our state and local parks, like the ones I just mentioned. This is a huge win, $9.5 billion fund for our national parks to fill that backlog. The backlog at Yosemite alone is around $500 million, so this is long overdue, and $900 million a year in perpetuity for the Land and Water Conservation Fund. This is, I believe, one of the biggest bipartisan wins on the environment and the preservation of public lands in many, many years in Congress. You might ask yourself, why is the administration going along with this? Well, two very vulnerable senators in swing states, or at least for the Senate races, swing states, specifically Cory Gardner in Colorado and Steve Daines in Montana, both pushed Leader McConnell to allow a vote on this bill. And the vote basically reflected all Democrats in support, and the Republicans were split. I think those with a national park in their state or significant LWCF funding like we have in California voted for it. Same thing happened in the House. Now it's going to go to the president. He's already said he's going to sign it into law. So this is a big deal. In addition to that, we've had a lot of local environmental wins. In June, we announced $11.5 million for the Del Mar Bluffs, coming from the U.S. Department of Transportation, money for the planning, engineering, and design phase of both the Encinitas and Solana Beach coastal storm damage reduction project and the San Clemente shoreline project. These are long overdue funds from the federal government that are going to help stabilize our coastline, and $300 million through the U.S.-Mexico-Canada trade agreement to help clean up the water pollution issues at the Tijuana River Valley, our border with Mexico. So I'm thrilled by all these environmental wins. The last thing I'll mention is that we just released our San Onofre report, and I'm really, really proud of that. The task force with lots of recommendations on how we get that waste off the beach as quickly as we can. We already have introduced our Spent Fuel Prioritization Act, HR 2995, that focuses on prioritizing the highest risk sites, such as ours, with the population density and the seismic risk and all the rest, to try to get that waste off the coast as quickly and as safely as we can. Finally, for all the veterans out there, I want to, as always, thank you for your service. And today is actually National Hire a Veteran Day. I chair the subcommittee on veterans economic opportunity with jurisdiction over many of these issues. I'm deeply concerned that the veteran unemployment rate has gone from roughly 3% now to triple or quadruple that. It was actually up around 12, and now we think it's back down to perhaps below 10, but we don't know how these most recent shutdowns will impact that. We have significant legislation that we're moving through the process, HR 7111, that we just marked up in committee yesterday, so I'm encouraged by that. I expect a floor vote soon. In addition to that, on Monday, we passed a really great bill in the House that I worked on with my friend, Republican Gus Bilirakis of Florida, the Ryan Cools bill, that would dramatically improve the specially adapted housing benefits for service-disabled veterans to help them to retrofit their homes, their cars, etc. So it's a great bill. It's going to help a lot of disabled veterans. It already passed in the Senate. We introduced it in the House first in 2019. Took the Senate about a year or year and a half to get it over the finish line, but they did. We passed it in the House. On Monday, it's going to go to the president, where I hope it's going to be signed into law. So another example of good things happening. It doesn't always make the news, doctor, but there are some good things happening. But I want to get right to your questions, and we've got a bunch. Nancy in Oceanside asked, why does Mnuchin want control over the USPS before the 2020 election? Well, that is a very interesting question. Now, for those who don't know exactly what the background is, in the CARES Act, we authorized $10 billion for USPS, which isn't enough, but at least gets them started to get through the pandemic. But postal leaders have not accessed a dime because Mnuchin has wanted some very significant restrictions over how the USPS uses those funds. Now, I am deeply concerned that the new person that the president's put in charge of USPS has the objective of privatizing the USPS. Much like I'm concerned that Betsy DeVos wants to privatize public education. There's a recurring theme here. We need to protect and strengthen the United States Postal Service, not privatize it. And so we're going to keep a very close eye on this. I can tell you that the numbers of revenue that's lost due to COVID-19, we thought 13 billion, now we're hearing 22 billion has been lost due to COVID-19. So it's incredibly important that we get the 25 billion that we fought for and that we got through in the House version of the HEROES Act, and that Mnuchin released the original 10 billion from the CARES Act. Next question, Dr. LaCroix. This is probably for both of us. Susanna in Oceanside asks, I'm very upset that the CDC is no longer directly receiving data from the states about their COVID cases. How do we know that the data that will be released to the public is accurate? And here's another one. What are the reasons and the implications for the White House rerouting COVID-19 data away from the CDC? It doesn't look good to me. Can Congress do anything about that? And this is from Curtis in Carlsbad. So, Doctor, you want to
let me start, and then we rely on you and your colleagues to fix this for us. But what I want you to know, first of all, is we have a president who's told us that the COVID-19 virus wasn't going to be any problem. It wasn't going to be very big. He's told us that we shouldn't let a cruise ship dock in our ports because we'll have to count the cases of COVID on the cruise ship. He's told us that we should stop testing so much so that our case numbers will not go up. What could go wrong with the White House supervising the public health data that we need to control the pandemic? This event happened not last week, but the week before. And I want you all to understand that hospitals in the United States have been providing daily data on the number of COVID-19 patients admitted and the availability of hospital beds, ventilators, and personal protective equipment so we can be prepared to save American lives and get supplies and life-saving medicines where they need to go. So about 2 weeks ago, the administration told hospitals to stop reporting this data directly to the CDC and instead to either send it to their state health department or use a newer portal set up by a private contractor called Teletracking, to which they awarded without competition, apparently, a $35 million contract to duplicate the health system that the CDC's been using for years. This portal bypasses the CDC and provides the data directly to the Department of Health and Human Services, which oversees CDC. Why did they do that? I don't know why they would do that unless they wanted to manipulate the data and tell us lies about the data. That's just a hypothesis based on their past behavior. And Dr. Garfien would want you to know that the history of surveillance of infectious diseases in the United States in real time goes back to before we were born, goes back to 1741 when we first asked a Rhode Island colony to report communicable diseases among their patrons to the government. We have a long history of this kind of surveillance. One of the things that happened the week before last was that suddenly the CDC's coronavirus dashboard disappeared. Unexpectedly, it wasn't told to them. They were having conversations with HHS about this alternative portal. They didn't expect to lose their dashboard. And it was just incredibly concerning when that happened. The 24-hour disappearance of the agency's dashboard was an unwelcome surprise. And so there was a flap about that. I think a lot of this is out of the public eye. Somebody got DHHS to restore the CDC's dashboards on Thursday and said they were committed to transparency going forward. So we saw that public health data were manipulated and suppressed in the state of Florida. We saw them manipulated in the state of Georgia. Are we going to see our public health data suppressed and manipulated on a national level? And can this be stopped? And with that, Mike, tell us what you can do.
Well, thank you so much for that. Yesterday, we sent a letter to the White House. I know the Senate did as well, basically excoriating them for doing this and demanding that they reverse course. We'll see what happens with that letter. I have the great hope that they're going to reverse course based on our letter. But what we are also doing is we're engaging in all of our spending bills right now, our different authorizations, which would include for the relevant agencies. So I think we're going to take a hard look at that without giving too much away.
Oh, great.
So we still do have the power of the purse. And
$35 million of our taxpayers' money to divert data from the CDC.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable. And, you know, Azar, as a political appointee and Trump loyalist, I just have much less trust for him and for the reliability of HHS than I do for the CDC and Dr. Redfield. And well, Dr. Redfield, he's a very conservative guy, but I also think he's tried to provide basic public health information. You know, I think the CDC's reputation, unfortunately, through all of this has been tarnished pretty badly. So my great hope is that, you know, we don't politicize the data, which is what I think HHS would do. So the next question from Jean in Encinitas. She asked, did you hear Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's speech on the floor of the House? If so, how did it affect you? Yes, I did, Jean. And I have to tell you, it was a very powerful hour. You know, Leader Hoyer offered a full hour to Representative Ocasio-Cortez and a number of my colleagues. And I was very moved by what many of them had to say. Because there is no place in the House of Representatives, or really anywhere, for the sort of comment and the sort of attitude that Representative Yoho of Florida exhibited towards my colleague. And it has nothing to do with ideological disagreement. I disagree every day with my colleagues on all sorts of things, but I would never in a million years use language like that or treat someone with that little respect. So moreover, I felt that Representative Yoho's so-called apology really was not much of an apology. I thought it was incredibly disappointing at the very least. There is, unfortunately, still a pervasive culture of sexism in certain quarters in Washington. And, you know, we have to do everything we can to call it out because the conversation that Yoho had in public, I think is reflective of the conversations that unfortunately, many of my colleagues have had in private. It is unacceptable, intolerable. If they disagree ideologically with one of our colleagues, let's have a debate and discussion of ideas. Let's not resort to name calling. So it was entirely and patently offensive. And I give great credit to all of my colleagues who stood on the House floor against it. Yes, I was very, very moved by what was said. And let's hope that we can turn the page on this. and that we can improve the behavior of many of my colleagues, including Representative Yoho, who still has not issued a genuine apology in this matter. Here's a question for Dr. LaCroix from Greg in Carlsbad. Greg says, yesterday I had blood drawn to determine if I had COVID-19. Before the blood draw, the doctor interviewed me as to why I wanted the test. My wife had a severe flu in January that lasted many weeks. The doctor informed me that even if she did have COVID-19 in January, it would be hard or impossible to detect because the antibodies are not long-lived, 3 to 4 months. Can you use your resources to confirm or dispel the statement? And if it's true, how will we ever develop a vaccine with longevity?
Well, I think this is an area where we can be somewhat reassuring, Greg. So there have been studies in China, Britain, and now the United States looking at how long antibodies last. And when you think about when COVID started to be noticed in the world, so we're talking in Wuhan in February, March, we're still very early in the pandemic. So we have to watch about what's happening with the antibodies over time. But these 3 studies that have been done tracked antibodies. There's a study from UCLA that tracked antibodies in 34 people and found that the average antibody levels dropped to half of where they started over a period of about 2.5 months. But there were still half of the antibodies there. And it's completely normal for your antibody response to drop after a period of time. So that the doctors, the infectious disease doctors say is what we would expect for most viruses. So what I'm reading is that 90% of people had antibody responses that lasted at least 3 months. So I think your doctor was wrong about how long. And when they say at least 3 months, that just means that they've only been able to study this for 3 months. It doesn't mean they go away after 3 months. And these antibodies were still able to neutralize the virus, at least in the lab. So the doctors are saying that it's reasonable to assume that there'll be protection from antibodies for a time frame of 1 to 3 years. And I think that's really reassuring. But of course, we're scientists and we have to prove it. So as time goes by, we'll be looking at that really carefully.
Thank you for that answer. Margie in Vista says, I was recently employed in a temporary administrative position at the California Census Bureau Regional Office. The office is very disorganized without effective systems implemented. The workplace culture is not professional with a great deal of wasted time and often feels like a toxic high school classroom without a teacher. They talk about politics, even though the Hatch Act prohibits employees from talking about politics while at work. In addition, employees don't follow COVID regulations. Some don't wear masks while stepping out from their desks and or the corridors. I even saw a couple of employees hugging. Some don't keep their 6 feet distance. Some are wearing masks with vents. At this point, I wonder if the census will be able to have an accurate 2020 census count. I encourage you to conduct an inspection visit. Well, Margie, first of all, we'll definitely follow up and make sure that our district office is aware of this. And what I will say is that the Census Bureau has an inspector general. Her name is Peggy Gustafson. She has oversight authority. And it's the independent inspectors general like her that are responsible for investigating misconduct. So the IG's office has a whistleblower hotline, other ways to submit a complaint online, and that might be an option to consider. But I hope that our office is able to connect with you and we can move forward and hopefully get you the, get some relief for the situation. Here's a question for Dr. LaCroix from Betty Ann in Rancho Santa Fe. She says, I have one son in 11th grade and another son in 8th grade. Nobody wants to get these kids out of the house and back to school more than I do. But there's no way we are going to send them back to school unless there is some sort of treatment for COVID. Please help me to understand, if we have a few weeks of low numbers and the school system reopens, what's going to happen if someone's kid starts coughing or sneezing in the classroom? How would that work? Would we evacuate the school? Would everyone have to get tested every time? What if it were just a regular seasonal cold? Doctor, great question.
That's a great question, Betty Ann. What a mess. Well, we do have treatments. I just want to start by saying we do have treatments, and there's still a lot of people dying. So we don't have treatments that can prevent all of the deaths. If schools reopen the way Betsy DeVos would like them to, and the way President Trump would like them to, we will see teachers die, we will see children die, we will see their parents and grandparents die. It will increase the number of deaths in our community. There's no question about it. The CDC, this entire question's been entirely politicized, and as Congressman Levin already said, the best way to get kids back to school is get the viral burden low in the community so we can send our kids back to school. So this past week, President Trump didn't like the CDC guidance on reopening schools, so he didn't allow it to be released. CDC came out with new guidance, the beginning of which encouraged children to go back to school, and it really focuses on the lesser transmissibility among small children, young children. It doesn't deal with exposure by adults, teachers with underlying conditions, or any of the people who would be at risk, staff, etc. But the rest of the CDC guidance, behind the politics, has gotten good reviews actually for being pretty reasonable. So let me tell you some of the things that it says in the CDC guidance. Could reopening schools lead to increased rates of COVID-19? So I told you I thought it could. The CDC guidance says that evidence from schools throughout the world suggests that reopening schools may be low risk so long as the burden of SARS-CoV-2 in the community is low. Computer simulations from Europe have suggested that school reopening may further increase spread in communities where transmission is already high. That would be like us right now in California. As schools reopen, more will be learned about the feasibility and effectiveness of mitigation strategies, such as wearing cloth face coverings and keeping children's desks 6 feet apart. Regardless of the level of community transmission, we're going to have to be vigilant when kids go back to school, which I personally think is not going to be safe for quite a long time. When would schools close? According to the CDC guidance, and it says the decision to close schools for in-person learning should be made together by local officials, including school administrators and public health officials. Well, that's good. And it should be transparent for students, staff, parents, caregivers, and guardians, and all community members. The decision to close schools for in-person learning should take into account a number of factors, including the following. And the number one thing they say is the importance of in-person education to the well-being of students. That's great. The level of community transmission, whether cases have been identified among students and staff, and other indicators that local public health officials use to assess the status of COVID-19 in our area, some of which you know. So we always have a dashboard going in our counties that show how well we're doing and whether we're on the governor's watch list here. I think if schools were to reopen in a place with significant transmission, it wouldn't last very long unless the community was willing to tolerate excess deaths in children, staff, teachers, parents, and grandparents. And I don't know what it takes to horrify people these days. I'm horrified at the thought of that, but that is the decision we're being asked to make. It's a life and death decision. And I vote for life. We can teach our children at home if we have to. We can come together as a community. I've volunteered with some, my kids are about to turn 27 years old. I would love to help you teach your children. I can give them a class on epidemiology. We can learn from the pandemic all around us. We can come together as a community and help parents who are impacted by this. I'm sure we can do it and get through this, but sending people back to school and hoping they don't get infected and die is just too high risk.
Thank you for sharing that perspective. Wanted to move on. We had 3 questions on San Onofre, so I'll read all of them. Julian in Orange County, can you please explain in a nutshell the implications of the California Coastal Commission's approval of the San Onofre storage plan? Jiffy in San Clemente says the vote by California Coastal Commission is beyond deeply disturbing, and my question is, what can you do about it? We can't let Edison destroy the futures of San Diego, Orange, and LA counties, possibly even San Bernardino and Riverside counties. And Ken in San Clemente says, thank you for your work putting together the San Onofre Task Force. Now I read they're almost finished loading all the fuel into the canisters. Is it me, or did they really seem to speed up the process? Let me try to unpack that a little bit. The Coastal Commission basically approved the decommissioning to move forward. They did one thing that I thought was good, which is they enhanced the inspection and maintenance plan. We had advocated for even stronger inspections. I think there needs to be a resident inspector as long as there's fuel loading occurring. But the reality is that the Coastal Commission did what they did. There's areas of federal jurisdiction, and the Coastal Commission has jurisdiction over this particular permit. I would advise or recommend that, if you're interested, please read our San Onofre Task Force report. You can access that at the Samuel Lawrence Foundation website or our website. I'm grateful for all the community that participated. One of the recommendations of the task force, something that we're going to work towards, is to have canister life of at least 100 years. We've got to make sure that on a go-forward basis that we've got the failure risk of canisters due to stress corrosion, cracking, and other environmental factors carefully considered before we allow the choice such as was made at SONGS. Now, part of what this permit is supposed to guarantee is the transportability of the canisters at SONGS. So I'm also working very hard, if you read the report, on how we're going to transport, the rail and the other interested parties are all going to have to come together and agree on a transportation plan. But also, even more fundamental is where we're going to send the waste. And as I've said many times, the problem at San Onofre with spent nuclear fuel really isn't the main problem. It's the symptom. The main problem is we lack a comprehensive strategy to deal with spent nuclear fuel across the United States. So that's what we're working to address in Congress, and our report outlines the ways we're doing that. Here's another one for you, Doctor. This is from Sophia in Oceanside. I heard that some people have gotten sick with COVID-19 multiple times. Is that true? Why would the antibodies not prevent them from getting sick a second time?
Well, thank you so much, Sophia, for that question. That keeps coming up because what we're finding is that for some people, COVID-19 is a really long illness, and they might feel better, they might test negative, and then all of a sudden they don't feel well again. And very few people have tested positive a second time. Right now, the infectious disease doctors, including Dr. Fauci, don't believe these are truly new occurrences of COVID-19. The positive tests could be false positives, and they think it's not an insignificant possibility given the accuracy issues with some of these tests that has occurred, or that the tests have picked up dead remnants of the virus that remain in our blood long after the active virus is gone. Authorities believe this is what has happened in the hundreds of people who tested positive after recovering in South Korea, for example. So I will say that Francis Collins, who's the head of the NIH, Anthony Fauci, none of them believe that there truly is a reinfection. And if it is happening, they think it's happening in a very, very few people. So on that point, we can be reassuring. How long we'll be protected from our antibodies is something we need to study. But thank you for asking that question. And for now, feel reassured that you can't get it a second time. As far as
thank you. That's good to know.
Yeah.
I don't want to get it a first time. Not Lisa in San Diego asks, actually a similar question to what we were discussing before. The Trump administration is blocking Robert Redfield, director of the CDC, from testifying, blocking billions of dollars in funds for contact tracing and funding for the CDC. It has removed the tracking data from the CDC website. What can we do to help ensure that this is not permitted to go on? How do we protect this vital information and funding? Well, Lisa, we talked before a little bit about what Congress is doing with regard to the data. My good friend Don Beyer, a congressman from Virginia, he introduced something called the COVID-19 Data Transparency Act, which would require CDC to create a standardized method for state and local health departments to report COVID-19 data and post that data on their public website. I think it's a great idea. I co-sponsored it, and I hope that we can work to get it into the next COVID relief bill. But in general, I'm deeply concerned that the CDC is not able to do its job in an objective, data-driven fashion, and that we're politicizing health and safety in a way that should never happen. There was a recent op-ed in the Washington Post from former CDC leadership, both of Republican and Democratic administrations, saying that this had never happened, and it should never happen. The politicization of public health data, it's just crazy that we would do that. Here's another one for you, Dr. LaCroix. No maskers, it's a good term, but not such a good term. No maskers still are thinking that cloth masks won't work because they don't filter out viruses, which they won't, but that's not the purpose of wearing them. Please explain again how and why they work.
Well, thank you very much, Joshua, for that question. We've learned a lot about cloth masks since the beginning of the pandemic, and I'm going to read you some new results from a recent article in the Massachusetts Institute of Technology medical newsletter. Remember that viruses spread through respiratory droplets, and since most people are contagious in the 48 hours before their symptoms start, if they get symptoms, cloth face coverings are really meant to protect other people from our unknown infection when we talk, shout, sneeze, or cough. And there is steadily accumulating evidence that cloth masks perform this function really well. So let's look at that. And I get the feeling that the non-maskers at this point are not very data-driven, but we can at least be data-driven while this is going on. So evidence on how well cloth masks work come from both laboratory studies and real-world scenarios. One recent lab experiment used laser light scattering to visualize respiratory droplets generated while subjects were repeating the phrase, "stay healthy," just the way I'm talking to you right now. And while each utterance generated hundreds of droplets ranging in size from 200 to 500 micrometers, the researchers showed that covering the speaker's mouth with a damp washcloth, just a damp washcloth, blocked nearly all of them. So when you wear a mask, the droplets that are coming out of your mouth are not going to get by a 2 or 3 layer cloth mask. And that when they wear a mask, these people that you're around, the same protection is conferred to you. Even more compelling maybe is the evidence from epidemiologic data and case studies. So a recent study, for example, looked at COVID-19 growth rates before and after mask mandates in 15 states in the District of Columbia between the end of March and late May. And these researchers found that the mask mandates led to a marked slowdown in the daily growth rate, estimating that mask mandates may have prevented up to 450,000 cases of COVID-19, even in the imperfect way we've implemented them in our society so far. So remember that IHME graph that I showed you, that comes from these kinds of epidemiologic data showing the impact of mask mandates. They do work.
Wear a mask.
What are you wearing this week?
Well, every day I try to mix it up. So I have a bunch of masks. You know, we have a great group in San Clemente with Louise and the sewers, as they call themselves, and they've made over, I think it's more than this now, but 10,000 and counting. They're amazing. So I've got a bunch of theirs, and then I've got a bunch of the good old blue surgical masks that were provided by the House administration, and then I've got some other ones that get sent to me from time to time by different people. So
Rosie the Riveter, who's now close to 100 years old, is sewing cloth masks.
I think it's great. I think it's great. Well, and it's become a thing where my colleagues, you know, they like having the different states on the mask, or they put their name on the mask, or all kinds of stuff. So I don't care what it says on there. I just think wearing one is a good idea. Brian Talley on Facebook says, "Good afternoon, Congressman." Good afternoon, Brian. HR 4526, also known as the Tally Bill, has got to be passed without further delay to ensure the rights and protections of all veterans. We appreciate you, Congressman. Please be our voice this week and close this 74-year VA legal loophole. Well, Brian, doing everything I can, as you know, this bill is named after Brian, for those that couldn't figure that out. We had a hearing on this bill. It's one that I introduced last year, the Brian Talley VA Employment Transparency Act. My partner in this on the Republican side was Mark Meadows. Yes, that same Mark Meadows, which just goes to show you never know when you're going to find common ground. But Brian had a very tough story. He hurt his back very badly. He got a bad diagnosis, medical malpractice from a contractor at a VA facility. He was not told his rights to hire an attorney. And he is fighting for very basic transparency, not asking for anything unreasonable. But VA refuses to explain the things like the statute of limitations in different states. They say it's too hard. They're a $200 billion agency with thousands of employees. They can figure it out. And moreover, how can a veteran who doesn't have counsel figure it out? How are they supposed to figure it out if the VA with all its vast resources can't figure it out? So you could go back and you could see our hearing the other day. I got very poor answers, actually no answers from the VA. And I will continue to fight for this. And I know that Mr. Meadows down the street is a supporter of this. So, Brian, we're going to keep working for you to try to get this over the finish line. And I was encouraged that the bill was marked up in the House Veterans Affairs Committee this past week. That's the next step to get it over the finish line on the floor. Here's another one for you, Dr. LaCroix, from Elena in Encinitas. I'm sorry to say that I don't trust the Trump administration on anything, but especially not when it comes to their handling of the pandemic. I don't even trust the FDA or CDC anymore. If the vaccine is developed in Europe, will we be able to acquire one of their vaccines? For the record, I still trust the CDC and the FDA.
What an excellent question, Elena. And my answer is, I think if we get a new president, we might have a chance of that. When you read about this very question, it's worrisome. Right now, the United States, when it comes to creating a vaccine, has chosen to go it alone. President Trump just noticed the World Health Organization that we plan to withdraw in mid-2021 during the middle of a pandemic, when at just the time when some of these vaccines may be coming to fruition. The White House coronavirus effort, dubbed Operation Warp Speed, plan has basically invested in 7 candidate vaccines. That's out of 21 vaccine candidates in clinical trials globally and 139 in preclinical evaluation, according to the WHO. If one or more of our vaccines are effective, the view of this administration is that any sharing would come only after America's needs are fulfilled. So it won't surprise you to know that other nations think similarly. From the public health perspective, the way we see it, nations in an ideal world would collaborate to create vaccines. And as soon as one proves safe and effective, the formula would be to license it to every facility with the capability of manufacturing it all around the world. And then the resulting doses would go first to healthcare workers in virus hotspots around the world, then to health workers globally, and then to the rest of the world population. But the United States and other countries are bound to put themselves first. In the past 6 months, more than 46 nations have put export restrictions on medical supplies, including masks, gloves, disinfectants, and ventilators. And such behavior isn't a good recipe for stopping COVID-19 with vaccines either. The World Health Organization says, though, no one's safe until everyone's safe. And isn't that, if there's not one thing we've learned about this, no one's safe until everyone's safe. We can't have a safe state. We can't have a safe country. We can't have a safe world because our borders are open. We can't stay shut down. month after month. So it's very important for our government to have good relationships with the World Health Organization and with other countries around the world, and to be in coalitions around vaccine development and distribution. I think that's going to take a new administration to make it happen.
Here's another question for you, Dr. LaCroix, from Veronica in Solana Beach. Once we do have a vaccine, how long do you expect mask requirements and social distancing to stay in place? When will it be safe to remove these precautions?
So that's a futuristic question, and I think it's a really interesting question, Veronica. No one's actually talking about plans for this end game yet on masking and social distancing, probably because we're so far from being there and actually going in the wrong direction right now. We're still seeing so much resistance to precautions, even during the growth phase of the pandemic. I just wanted to, I could make up an answer, but let me tell you what I think goes into this. Herd immunity is what you're asking about. So a vaccine is out next year sometime. And when is it safe to take off our masks? Well, herd immunity is the proportion of people in the population who need to be immune to reduce the spread of a contagious disease. And this varies depending on how transmissible the contagion is. So for example, for measles, you need to have 94% of people vaccinated with measles vaccine to maintain herd immunity. We don't know the herd immunity threshold yet for COVID-19. So it's impossible to give a truly informed answer to this question. Numbers get thrown around like we would need 70% of the people either with antibodies or with vaccination to slow in a very big way the ability of the virus to move around in the community. So I'm going to tell you what I think. My son and I talk about this sometime, and we agree that our culture may be permanently changed with respect to masking. As long as potent contagions like COVID-19 are around, you may decide you want to wear a mask whenever you're in crowds and the virus is circulating at a certain level. It's going to take some time to get back to it feeling like it's completely gone. I would say when viral transmission in our community is low, like less than 1% on the test positive rate, and when at least 50% of the surrounding population has been vaccinated, given that many others have probably already had COVID by that time, it may be safe to remove precautions, but there won't be any guarantee. So keep an eye on the numbers, and let's talk again next summer.
Thank you for that. Elaine in Oceanside has a really interesting question. She says, I am flabbergasted by McConnell's lack of action and possession of too much power. I'd find this obstruction simply arrogant and disheartening if I worked in Congress. Is there any way to force McConnell to bring a bill to the floor? Well, there are a number of things that senators can do. They can unfortunately, the Senate rules are archaic and make things very difficult to move. The filibuster rule requires that you have 60 senators to end debate and move a bill. You can move bills via unanimous consent. That, of course, requires every senator to agree, and McConnell can clearly block that. We haven't ever experienced an obstructionist quite like this. McConnell is given credit for being some sort of, master legislator, but in the reality of the last 2 years that I've witnessed, what I've seen is obstruction and very little else. I haven't seen a genuine desire to work together for the good of the people in most cases. I think we desperately need a new Senate majority leader. And I know Chuck Schumer would be very happy to take the job. And I would be very happy if that happened as well. Here's another one from Carrie in Dana Point. Carrie asks, our state was the first to shut down, and now we are at the top of the list for coronavirus cases. Do you blame it on us reopening too fast, or on the protests, or on both?
Good question, Carrie. We were a shining example of getting our state population out of harm's way early in this pandemic. And it was really, I was really proud to be a Californian. Many of us were like, wow, they they, even before we thought they needed to, they had shut down schools and universities and restaurants, bars, and it really helped us to flatten the curve during the period that we were sheltering in place. I will say that under growing political pressure as the economy folded, including by the president on Governor Newsom directly, he began letting localities define their own timeline according supposedly to some data, but there was a lot of flexibility. That's really what I blame the increasing infection rates on. Some local and state officials have also blamed the Black Lives Matter protests, but the research data so far really did not show a bump in infections that was traceable to the protests. These mostly took place outside, and participants were largely wearing masks that mitigated their risk of transmission. So what happened? California let its guard down. I think there was this misinformation. So wishful thinking and misinformation are part of what happened. The wishful thinking was that summer was going to give us a reprieve in the virus, and it did not. The misinformation was that for many months, it was said that the economy could get going and we could get back to work and the virus was going to go away. The president kept saying the virus is going to go away. You don't have to worry about this. Go about your daily lives. And I think that is one of the reasons why California is so out of control right now. I also just want to mention some of the bad things that are happening that we haven't talked about lately. Major outbreaks in nursing homes and in prisons and in migrant workers are going on in our state. You can read about them in the newspaper. It's really quite horrendous, the infection rates in these communities. The migrant workers in particular are really in harm's way now, as are the prisoners, but I think very little's being done to help the migrant workers. And, they're there maintaining our food supplies. Talk about white privilege. We go to the grocery store, it's filled with fresh California produce, and people are dying to make that happen for us, and we don't even know it. So we've got to help the migrant workers. We've got to make it so you don't die of COVID if you're serving a prison sentence. And for goodness sake, we need to make it safe to be in a nursing home. All of this is achievable. And we need to drive those rates back down. I think that's probably the theme for today. We know that shelter in place did it. If we have to go back to shelter in place, which nobody wants, it would serve the purpose, I think. You can tell, I didn't show you graphs today, but you can tell just what Governor Newsom did to curb our behavior in the last week or two by shutting the bars again and by not letting us sit inside in restaurants has already resulted, at least in San Diego County, in a drop in the test positive rate of 1 or 2%. If we just keep this up, we can do this. I really hope we don't need a full shelter in place again. But if we do, that's probably the fastest way to get things under control. And then if we come out again, we have a chance to do it right.
Thank you for that answer. Sherry in Oceanside asks, is the FEMA Senior Meal Program Great Plates continuing in August? My understanding, Sherry, is that it will be continuing until August the 9th, but I will look into beyond that. And it's a great program, and obviously we want to fight for nutrition assistance. And there's a lot for nutrition assistance in our HEROES Act. But again, we've got to fight for the provisions related to nutrition assistance in the final bill. Here's a question for Dr. LaCroix from Bill in La Jolla. I keep seeing advertisements for ultraviolet lights that you can put in your home or office to disinfect the room. I'm seeing those too. A, do they actually work? And B, there's no way they're any good for your health, correct?
Good question. My yoga teacher asked me this question this week, and I didn't really know the answer. So these are called germicidal ultraviolet lights, and they've been around for a long time, actually. I think that it's curious that they aren't being studied more and in wider circulation. when you actually read about these things, your first question is, do they actually work? And it appears that they do. So Columbia University in New York just released a study showing that almost 100% of seasonal coronaviruses present in airborne droplets were killed when exposed to a particular wavelength of ultraviolet light that is safe to use around humans. And that study's been published, and it's pretty exciting. There are restaurants in the state of Washington, amongst others, that are installing these ultraviolet lights at the top of their businesses, and it sucks the air up where the ultraviolet light can kill it, and there's very little exposure from humans. So expert at Hopkins has commented that although it's not perfect, it probably offers the best solution for direct air disinfection in the current pandemic. And it's been estimated that when these UV lights are turned on with proper ventilation, that it's equivalent to replacing the air in an indoor room up to 24 times in an hour. So I'm excited, let's bring that on. Let's get some UV light in our restaurants so we can enjoy eating inside again. The other question is, are they safe? And it turns out that because they're in industrial situations, they're usually installed on the ceiling. We actually have 70 years of safety data on these kinds of devices, and they are safe. They're safe as long as we don't do dumb things like most gizmos, right? Safe as long as you don't do dumb things. Very little's absorbed through the skin when they're up on the ceiling, and the human eye is most susceptible to damage. And so it's important, like Donald Trump looked at the solar eclipse with no glasses. That's what you don't want to do.
How could we forget?
That's what you don't want to do. And even when you do that, even if you were to do that, there are no long-term consequences from accidental UV overexposure, even to the eyes, they say. It's uncomfortable. There's some corneal shedding, and your eyes will replace the damage in a day or two. So I hope that we see more of these being developed as part of the industry around keeping us safe in the era of COVID-19 and any other virus that behaves like it, so that we can. It doesn't actually kill viruses because they're not living organisms. They have to invade cells to survive, but it does inactivate them. And I think we should learn more about these technologies and get them widespread. I think it's, I think this is another place we should see jobs. Yeah.
Well, better than injecting or ingesting Lysol, which is great. That's definitely good. Janet in Mission Viejo asks, Mike, why is the Congress going to pass defense spending if we can't even extend unemployment benefits? Janet, it's a great point. We've got to do both. It isn't, for me, it's not mutually exclusive. I want to make sure that our military families, that everyone at Camp Pendleton has the resources that they need. The NDAA, National Defense Authorization Act, included $105 million for the base and a 3% raise for the troops. So on the other hand, we can't allow these federal unemployment benefits to expire with millions of Americans, 25 million Americans that are going to lose the $600 a week at a time when a third of July rent payments were late or people were having trouble making those payments. So they are, I don't think, directly related. The spending bills that were up against this week and the NDA last week, we're working on those. We're also working on the COVID relief bill. So we can do both. We can walk and chew gum at the same time, and we have to. We've got to get the Senate to at least offer their proposal. Matt from Carlsbad has one for you, Doctor. I was recently tested, and they gave me a rapid test, and they also sent the swab to the lab. The rapid test took 20 minutes to come back, and the swab takes about a week. Are they both equally accurate? If so, why waste two tests?
So you can read, there's so many different platforms for these tests that you can read about their accuracy on the FDA website, and we can post again that link. Every week there's new action in the testing arena. I think the reason your doctor gave you a rapid test and then also sent a swab to the lab is that the rapid tests, if they're positive, are thought to be pretty accurate. If you test positive, you probably have COVID, but it would still, even in that case, be confirmed with a swab type test, I think. But but they're known to yield false negatives. So perhaps the doctor wanted to make sure you were truly negative by sending the swab. So why do we use the rapid tests at all? I think it's if people are symptomatic, it finds the positives and gets people where they need treatment faster than waiting 5 or 10 days for your test results. That's what I think is happening. It's not a very desirable situation, though, to have to take 2 tests to get a definitive answer at a point in time. But I did want to say give you a couple pieces of good news. There's actually 4 rapid tests now, which is there was only 1 at the beginning of the pandemic. So it's nice to have 4. And there's some other new diagnostic tests available coming our way. One of them, they're about to release at-home collection tests. They're currently only available by prescription from a doctor, but they allow people to collect the sample at home and send it directly to the lab for analysis. I actually think someday there'll be at-home test kits, rapid testing technologies that we can just check ourselves in the morning and not go to work if we have something like COVID. I think that will be coming our way. So let's stop there and just say that this is another great area for American ingenuity, testing and making it widely available, cheap and accurate. And I think because there's so much money to be made doing this, we're going to see a lot of development in that area.
Terrific. Well, I am grateful to everyone for submitting such excellent questions. I wanted to turn it over to you, Dr. LaCroix. We're almost out of time, but wanted to get your closing thoughts this week, sort of where we are and where we need to go. I think I have a hunch of what you're going to say, but these are obviously very difficult times for so many of our viewers and listeners. It'd be wonderful to hear some closing thoughts from you.
Well, you know, the bottom line is that our behavior determines the shape of the curves of this epidemic. So we need to tell the truth about the data and protect each other. And, you know, without me saying what those things are. But I also just want to say that I'm very grateful to all that you're doing in Congress and to AOC for her words this week in support of women. It was incredibly moving to all of us who've been affected by you know, the dehumanization that she talked about on the House floor this week. And she inspired many of us who've watched this happen. Thank you for not going home that day and saying that was just another day of being treated horribly. Thank you for speaking up for all of the women in the world about what basic human decency is. I want our government to reflect decency and honesty and transparency and to care about the well-being of all Americans. I think those are values we should be able to agree on.
Well, thank you so much for that powerful statement. And I have good news, is that we have an election in exactly 100 days. Exactly 100 days. I would obviously appreciate your help. You know, we try to do these town halls and really stay out of politics. We'll keep doing that. But I will mention that if you're interested in volunteering or donating or getting a yard sign, you can do all of that and plenty more at mikelevin.org. That's MIKELEVIN.org. And I want to just thank our incredible team. Ellen Montanari, who's done just a wonderful job helping to organize these now 34. She's done many of them. All of our team, Adam Berkowitz and Hunter, our political director, So grateful for their hard work. Also want to give a shout out to Chrissy and to Jonathan and Elizabeth. I miss you all very much. And I'll be here in DC a little while longer. We decided it'd be better for me not to fly. Normally I would fly twice a week, and we decided it'd be better for me not to do that. But miss you all very, very much. And to my parents, Andy and Henrietta, if you're watching, and to my in-laws, Ed and Judy Parker in Arizona, love you all and miss you all. And simplest advice, wear a mask. It's really not that hard. I post every day a picture of me wearing a mask. I'm going to keep doing it. Some people like it. Most people like it. If they criticize it, oh well. I think as elected officials, hopefully we'll all try to lead by example. I was grateful when the president tweeted the picture of himself wearing the mask. It was only 4 or 5 months too late. But you know, I agree with you, Doctor, that had he done it much earlier, it could have saved lives. And we are where we are right now. So wear a mask. I'll close with a quote from my friend again, the great John Lewis, who said, "We used to say that ours is not the struggle of one day, 1 week, or 1 year. Ours is not the struggle of one judicial appointment or presidential term. Ours is the struggle of a lifetime, or maybe even many lifetimes. And each one of us in every generation must do our part. And if we believe the change we seek, then it is easy to commit to doing all we can, because the responsibility is ours alone to build a better society and a more peaceful world." Thanks for watching.